So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Maribel Ojeda. I am the Director of Professional Development at ProLiteracy, and I'm joined by Michele Vick, our wonderful workplace literacy facilitator. She's going to present today on landing the job, preparing learners for applying and interviewing. Go ahead to the next slide, please. So as a reminder, use the chat to introduce yourself, share any links or resources that you have for the group, and asking questions. For the Q&A, I'd like you to reserve that for content questions that will be answered by the presenter or by ProLiteracy staff. Those are really for the questions you have about the content. As I said, if you have a technical problem or if you have any concerns, you can go ahead and use the raise your hand feature, and a ProLiteracy representative will be here to help. If you want to view the captions, you should click the button Show Captions, and you can also see the transcript. We are recording, and you will receive a follow-up email with links to the webinar recording, the PowerPoint. You will receive a certificate of attendance. You'll get the transcript for the chat and the Q&A, membership information, and scholarship information. And as a reminder, in order to help you all use the content that we're sharing during our TTP project, we have now small group workshop sessions. Each workshop expands on the topic from the webinar and helps you to apply it to your own context. It takes place about a week later. Can you go back one more? Yeah. And is limited to about 25 people per session. The workshops are listed in the chat, and it provides you with an opportunity to ask questions specifically about trying these ideas in your classroom, in your context. You'll share ideas with the presenter and the other members of the group. It's a great opportunity to work with your colleagues around implementing the new stuff that you're learning. Go ahead. As you can see, we'll put the registration links, and they each have a slightly different focus. We have workshop 1, exploring the resources and experiencing a learning activity firsthand. Workshop 2 is identify your learner's needs, set goals, and write a learning objective. And then workshop 3 is writing a lesson plan segment and demonstrating a learning activity. Additional resources are available to all the participants in Teacher Training Plus. You have the ability to apply for a scholarship to get $1,000 worth of materials from New Readers Press. We have book sets for students and teachers, and they're listed there. And the scholarships are limited, so please click the link in the chat to apply. One additional benefit is a free 1-year individual membership for participating in a TTP webinar. You're only eligible to receive that once. So please apply for the membership scholarship with the link that Danielle has put in the chat. Remember that the deadline is coming up in November. And as you know, we're in an election season, and that media and digital literacy skills are even more important. We have an election guide, an interactive voting guide for adult learners. Please check out proliteracy.org/voting-guide. This guide comes to you from ProLiteracy and the easy-to-read weekly newspaper website, News for You. The guide explains who can vote and why every vote counts. It describes how people in the U.S. choose their leaders and tells participants how to register to vote and where to cast their ballot. And finally, I'm going to pass it over to Michele Vick for landing the job, preparing learners and applying and interviewing.
Thank you, Maribel, and welcome everybody. I'm so glad to see you here today, and I can't wait to explore these ideas and resources with you today. And we're going to be touching on some of the things that Maribel just discussed and the links that Danielle has been putting in the chat box throughout today's webinar, because we're going to talk about some resources that you could have for free using your scholarship money. And we're also going to talk about those workshops that are next week that I hope you will join me for at least one, if not all of them. All right, so let's get started and dive in. My name is Michele Vick. I'm an instructional consultant at Texas A&M with the Center for Teaching Excellence. And right now I work with international students, helping them with their English language speaking. I have 20 years this last month, 20-year anniversary, teaching English to multilingual learners of English outside of the US and also in the US. And most of that 20 years was working with adults. I prefer adult learners. I also work as a content developer and a coach for those who work with internationally trained professionals here in the US. So internationally trained professionals, this is people who've come to the US from outside, but they have some sort of degree or qualification that they earned in their home country, and they're looking what is that on-ramp to work in the US using the skills and the certifications and the degrees that they brought already from outside. And then finally, I work as a teacher trainer, training other teachers, and I love that. And today I get to do some training with you all, so I'm looking forward to it. All right, let's talk about what we're going to learn today. So today we are going to spend some time identifying the steps that learners need to know for applying for jobs. And then we're going to recognize some of those common barriers that they face when they're applying for jobs and hopefully figure out some ways that we can help lower those barriers for them through our instruction and the activities we do with them. We're going to explore some lesson activities that help teach job search skills, help practice completing job applications, and help prepare for job interviews. And finally, through each of these things, we're going to identify resources for teaching these skills from applying for jobs all the way to interviews and hopefully landing that job. And then I really hope you'll come next week to the workshops because we're going to do a whole lot more deeper dives into those resources and get our hands on them. I'll talk more about that as we go through so you have an idea of what you can expect. All right, so to get started, I want to hear from you. When you think about your learners and you think about them looking for jobs, applying for jobs, what barriers do they face? Can you open your chat box and write some of those barriers that you know your learners might face in the chat box? And I'll give you a couple of minutes to do that. All right, so I see things coming through already. Things related to their English proficiency, to lack of formal experience, a lot about language skills, digital literacy, um, lack of formal work experience, culture and customs. That's great. Documentation, that is a big one. Um, let's see what else we've got here. Yeah, the documentation. Ooh, a criminal record. Re-entering the workforce at an older age. That's also great. Learning disabilities, not feeling confident enough. Very good. Education that doesn't transfer here to America. All right, so here's what I want to say. Some of the things that you have put in the chat box, we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about simple steps that we can take in the classroom, simple activities that will help to prepare them. I don't have I don't have a plan today to address all of those, but many of them, for example, transferring their education to the US and things related to documentation and even thinking through how do you talk about a criminal record. I have some experience with all of those things, and we can discuss those in depth next week in the workshops. So if one of these barriers doesn't get covered today, I urge you to bring that to the workshop next week, and we'll talk about them, and I'll talk to you about some things I've done in the past related to those things. We will discuss some things related to language and digital skills. Now, I have another question for you, and I'm not putting the question up on the board, so you'll just have to listen to me, but I want you to write this one in the chat box as well. Let's imagine you have a nephew. He's around 20 to 25 years old, and he doesn't have much experience getting a job. And he comes to you and he says, Auntie, what are the steps, or Uncle, what are the steps that I need to take to apply for a job or to get a job? What are you going to tell him? So write those things in the chat box. What are the steps you think someone needs to take to get a job? Ooh, I like these. Volunteering to get experience. Absolutely. Yeah. Doing the resume, following through with a potential employer, finding out your interests. That's great. A job search, going to an interview. Very good. All right, so we've got figuring out references, exploring options, cover letters, visiting different places, etiquette related to interviews, online job ads. There's a lot of good stuff in here. So today we're going to be thinking about what is the order we might want to teach some steps to finding a job. And then we want to also think about what are the barriers related to these steps that our learners might face. We're going to do another engagement activity. And so this is a Slido activity. And on the screen, you can see some steps that you might take to applying for a job. And I would like for you to join the Slido and try to put these steps in order. And if you cannot access this Slido, you could do it in the chat box. Danielle's going to write in the chat box all of these steps so that you have them. And she's also put the Slido in the chat box so you can click on that link, enter the code, or you can scan this QR code that's on the screen. So I'm just going to give you a moment to either do this in the chat box or join the Slido. And again, all you have to do is go to slido.com and enter the code, or you can scan the QR code on the screen. And I can see that some people are trying to join. All right. I love Slido because the results start popping up in real time. And just for you to know, if you are ever using Slido, in the top right-hand corner, you can see how many people have joined. So you get a good idea, like, are people getting on and finding their way there? And right now I can see there's 3 of you there. I hope to see more. All right, it just went up to 5. That's great. People are getting on. They're doing their stuff. And I see the results coming in. I'll give you just a few more minutes to do this. And again, if for some reason you're having trouble with the Slido, then go ahead and put your thoughts in the chat box. You can just copy and paste and move around the order of items in the chat box. Danielle's already put them in the chat box. Oh, someone's saying they're having trouble copying and pasting it out. I am so sorry about that. I don't know why that's happening. Yeah, it's not letting me copy either. That's unusual. So unfortunately, instead of copying and pasting, you might have to retype if you want to use the chat instead of the Slido. But I do have 18 of you on the Slido putting these things in order. And We'll give you just about 30 more seconds to finish up. Want to make sure everybody gets a chance to complete it. Okay, so just summarizing what we see from the results, clearly there's a clear favorite for the first thing you would do in order if you were advising that nephew. You're going to want them to inventory their interests and their skills and their needs and other factors because they need to know what kind of job they're interested in or that they would be skilled or good at and what they need in terms of a job. So they may need things such as a full-time job or a part-time job or flexible hours or benefits or not, they don't need benefits, that sort of thing. And then the rest of these, there is not one exact order that these could be in, but I think that the order that has shown up from what you all have ranked things as is a pretty standard order of then you want to research your types of jobs, preparing resume and other documents and getting that all ready, searching for a job, researching about the specific company, applying for a job, interviewing, sending a thank you note. We all know that, and hopefully that was fairly easy for you all to think about, but our learners might not, or they may skip some of these steps, and then that could cause some potential problems. So I'm going to go ahead and change to my next slide. And you know, our learners, they may need some guidance identifying what they need and want from a job. They also may need some guidance knowing where to look for jobs, interpreting job postings, we're going to touch on that one, completing and submitting online job applications that relates to those digital skills that several people mentioned in the chat box. Choosing references, people mentioned references, and preparing for interviews. And this is just a few of the things they may need guidance on. The scope of a 1-hour webinar doesn't give us time to go in depth on all of these things today, but we're going to talk about some activities that will help with several of them. And we want to help remove some barriers. So let's imagine this scenario. You have a learner and they want to find a job. And then they learn about a job opening. Maybe it's an internal position, or maybe their cousin works somewhere and their cousin tells them there's a job opening. And then they start to fill out the application. Let's say it's an online application. And then all of a sudden they realize that the information that the application is asking for isn't right there at their fingertips. And there's like the name of some place they worked in the past that they can't remember fully, or an address, or a date, or something like that. So they stop the application process because they're not ready. And then they miss the opportunity because when they go back to apply for the job, it has disappeared, it's been filled, and they remain underemployed or unemployed. And this is a true story. This has happened to me once, where I started an online job application and I just realized my resume wasn't up to date, and my resume didn't kind of match what the kind of job I was applying for. And so I stopped the application process so I could get my resume ready. And by the time I came back to apply with an updated resume, the job had been filled. And it was super disappointing because it was a job I was really excited about. So we want to help remove some of these barriers. And the first thing that we could do is help students prepare for the search and be ready when they find a job they're interested in applying in by walking them through a process of completing a personal fact sheet. And this would be a digital document that they could keep and have it saved somewhere that they could later copy and paste from, and all the information they need to fill out a job application is at their fingertips. So what are a few things that would be on a personal fact sheet? First of all, personal information. Their their address, their phone number, all the details that they need, their work and education history. And this would be a good time when you're helping learners create a personal fact sheet to teach them about the recent first chronological order that happens when you're writing about your work history. So like you're putting your most recent job first and then going backwards in time, and similar with education history. But having that all already ready on one document would really help lower the barriers so that that previous scenario that I mentioned doesn't happen. And then KSA, knowledge, skills, and abilities. I have applied for one job that actually made me fill out a true KSA statement where I had to tell the knowledge I had related to that job, the skills I had, and the abilities. That's not always going to happen for our learners on a job application, but still having listed out, these are some of the skills that I have. These are some of my abilities, like I know Microsoft Word, proficient with Microsoft Word, that kind of thing. Really is going to help speed up that process and facilitate a smoother, more successful process of filling out a job application, having it on a document. Possible references, have them go ahead and think through that and ask for permission from those references to use them as a reference. Their work preferences. Now, they may not be putting this on the job application itself, but I think going ahead and having them write down what they're looking for and have that on their personal fact sheet as well is super useful. So are they, what type of job are they looking for? What kinds of responsibilities, duties, and activities are they wanting in a job position that they take? What kind of salary are they looking for? What kind of hours are they wanting to work? What kind of benefits are they looking for? All of those kinds of things are useful to have on that personal fact sheet. And it just helps them to have all their information collected in one spot. So now we're going to do a resources highlight. Throughout this session today, I'm going to either highlight some resources or some activities. And all of the resources I'm highlighting in today's session are available to you using your scholarship. So isn't that exciting? You can get these resources by using your scholarship to access some of the new Reader's Press materials. So we're going to look at some resources that you could use that make it very simple for you to walk your students through a personal fact sheet activity where they're preparing that. And these are both paper copies that you could do in class, and then you would want to do some work teaching them how to create the Word document later. And I want to show you, before I show you what I have created, that I want to tell you that these are physical copies of workbooks, and I scanned them. And sometimes when you're scanning a physical copy, it doesn't look the greatest, but I promise you it looks great, the physical book. So the first book is called Road to Work and Choosing a Job Path. And we're choosing a job path is one book out of the Road to Work series. And this is a resource that I would use if I was working with learners who have a lower reading level. Maybe they're English speakers as their first language, but their reading level is just a little bit lower. Or maybe they are English language learners and they're at like a higher elementary to low intermediate level. And I would maybe weave this into a class where we're doing some reading or vocabulary work. And so it supports the other things you're trying to teach in a HSC GED class or an ESL class. So you can see here, this is talking about a career inventory. And it's asking students to think about their skills, their work experience, and the kind of job that they want, and to begin writing those things down. And again, this is pretty simple. They're just saying, I'm good at working with, I'm good at, or in the United States, I work for. So they're starting to brainstorm their Oops, sorry, I just knocked my mouse off the table. They're starting to brainstorm their job history and get that onto paper. And then the work preferences, what they're looking for in a job. And so this can be an important first step in helping learners start to build a personal fact sheet. And then you would want to help them transfer that to an electronic document and get it a little bit more fleshed out. I'm going to just show you the second page because I liked it too, because it builds some speaking skills, especially for ESL learners, so that you could also have them do a role play talking about their job preferences or the kinds of things that they're wanting to look at as they do a career inventory. And then you can see here some different search terms they could use. So you're building in some digital skills for online job searches, which we're going to talk about later. That is at a lower level. Now let's look at a little bit higher level. This is a book from New Readers Press. It's in a series called Career Power, and it's different kinds of skills for the workplace. So there's reading skills for the workplace, writing skills for the workplace. I think there's also vocabulary skills for the workplace. And this goes into a full personal fact sheet, and it tells you like step by step the kinds of things that you're going to want to create. So you're having them add information to these different sections, and it's got great tips in the margins. It has reading activities, so you're building those reading skills with your students. And then they can start filling in, again, the physical paper, and then later you would work with them because you'd want to make sure they transfer that to a digital document. So I do want to say that you don't have to use this. You could create a Google Doc, for example, and ask every student to add their information or create information on a Google Doc. Or you could create a worksheet yourself that you print out. But since you have the scholarship money, these are great opportunities for you to use these, get these books and use them with your students. So I want to remind you, next week on Monday, we're going to do a deeper dive into the resources, and we're going to look at some of the resources from today, like these that I just showed you. And then we're also going to do an activity where I'm going to be the teacher, and anyone who comes, you're going to be the learners, and I'm going to demonstrate how I would actually carry out this activity with a group of learners and what I would do step by step, so you can have that experience and get ideas, more ideas for implementation. All right, we next need to help students learn where to find jobs, where to find job postings. So again, I'm going to ask you to go back to the chat box and let me know, where do people look for jobs in 2024? All right, I see things coming through. Oh, I love all of these ideas. Great. So a lot about online job searches. I see different websites that you could look for jobs in online job searches. I see also job fairs, see in-person networking, career expos, company websites, family and friends. Good. Social media even. Okay, I think you guys have said every idea that I have on my PowerPoint. So internal, actually, I don't know if anyone said internal. Someone said company websites, but I think this is a big one, like teaching our students to be on the lookout for opportunities to move up in their current workplace. It benefits the company when they keep employees and promote from within a lot of times. And it's something that our students may not realize, that they can often apply for a job that's like a better position within where they currently work. Networking, people said that, so family, friends. Earlier, someone mentioned volunteer work as a step towards getting a job, and doing some volunteer work is a great way to also network. Online searches. Yes, that's the big one. And I have to say, that's the first one that came to mind for me as I was planning this. And so we're going to talk a little bit more about that and all those places like monster.com and Indeed and LinkedIn and other places. I do want to mention last year in the Teacher Training Plus series, I did a whole workshop or webinar on doing the career inventory and using some online tools like Career One Stop and ONET, and how you can have students kind of figure out what jobs they would be best at or they're interested in using those tools. And so Danielle's going to put the link to that webinar in the chat box. If you missed it, you could go back and watch it. But within Career One Stop and ONET, if you've used that to do that career inventory and job exploration, then once they land on a job they're interested in, there's usually a button they can click that's like, search for these kinds of jobs in my area. And so that's another place where they could do some online search, and it pairs nicely with career exploration activities. Also, a workforce center. In Texas, where I live, any medium to large town or city has a workforce center, staffing agencies also. So that's another option that your students may not know about that you want to point them to. Job fairs, someone mentioned that. In the city I currently live in Texas, the city throws a job fair at least once a year. I think it might even be twice a year about city jobs. And in the last city I lived in, there were multiple big job fairs that are career expos that happened in that city. And it was also a mid-sized city, only 200,000. All right, so I want to talk to you about an activity I like to do with my learners, and this is called a job search scavenger hunt. So this is assuming when I do this activity, I'm making the assumptions that I have already taught them a little bit about career exploration. They have landed a little bit on kind of what kind of job they're looking for. And we have looked at things like Career One Stop or Monster.com or Indeed.com and looked at how to search for a job, how to click around on things and look at a job posting. And then we've done that as a whole class activity where I've been displaying monster.com. Let's use that as an example. I've been typing in search terms. I've been showing them job descriptions. We've been talking about those. After that, I want to measure what they've learned, and I want to get them to get that hands-on experience, because that's the next step, not just me displaying monster.com on the big screen, but them actually getting their hands on a keyboard or their phone and doing it themselves. So after that, we'll do a activity where they have to search for a job themselves and they have to fill in a Google form for me. So I'm going to show you what's on the Google form, and then afterwards Danielle's going to put a link to this Google form in the chat box. So if you wanted to recreate this, you would be able to hold on to it after the today's webinar and recreate it. So I'm asking for their email so I know who put it in or submitted it, and I want to know, what did you type in the search box to find the job? And then this was when I was living in Waco. So did you find any jobs in this area? What's the job title? How long has the job been available? That's an important thing to teach students about. Minimum education required, qualifications required. How do you actually apply for the job? So important. Are they applying right there through the website where they found it, or do they have to go to an external website or send in something via email? Salary. I want them to think about, is that salary enough for them? And then would they be interested in the job? And then I ask them to give me the URL so that I can look at it. So this is all, I've done this successfully multiple times, and students have actually applied for some jobs they've found during doing this scavenger hunt. So it's a great way to give your students that hands-on experience to navigate it. And Danielle just put the link to that in the chat box. So going back to my slides, we've been talking a lot about the workshops. Next week, when you come, We're going to also, so on Monday, we're going to do a deep dive into the resources, and you'll get to experience me leading you through an activity as if you're a learner. On Tuesday, we're going to talk about which of these activities you might use or resources, and you're going to set a goal for using that. And then we're going to do a little bit more work about thinking about what would it look like to actually implement this in the classroom. And so if you have some questions about that scavenger hunt, then please bring those when you come next week to the workshop. All right. As we were looking at that Google form, you might have been thinking, wow, there's a lot to unpack in a job description. And so we need to teach our students to decode a job description. So for example, they need to know abbreviations and acronyms that you might see in a job description. There are often a lot of those. And especially if they are not English, or if they're English language learners, those abbreviations and acronyms might especially be unfamiliar to them. Also, we need to teach them what it means when they read about different benefits. So decoding that, decoding or how to tell is a job full-time or part-time, or even if it's flexible hours or set hours, and what does that mean, flexible hours. We need to also help them decode what it means if they see, for example, that the job was posted 6 months ago. That to me means they either need to lower their expectations that that job is still available. Maybe it just never got taken down, or there might be some not great reason why it's stayed open for 6 months. But also like knowing like the sooner you apply closer to when the job was posted, the more likely you are to be considered for the job. All of that is part of decoding those job descriptions. All right. We can also do this by showing some students some job descriptions and helping them work through that and think through what does this mean, all the things in the job posting. And I want to go back to a resource highlight that is in those books that you can get for free if you take advantage of that scholarship before the deadline. So this is again from Road to Work, Choosing a Job Path. In the book, there are multiple job posting images. And so you can, and they have different activities that go with them. So I'm just showing you one of many that's in there. So here is a job description or posting that's in the book. And you can see that it is asking them just to really look through it and understand what's in there. And I would extend, if I were using this, so I would ask them about this apply now. What does that mean if they're seeing that? Because digital skills wise, some students might need to be taught that's a button that you have to click on in order to apply. And so there's lots that you could add on to the 5 questions that are here to help them decode this job description. I want to add that this book from the Road to Work series is also a great one, and I didn't actually choose any resources from it for today's webinar, but I have a few extra things I'll show you from it next week in the workshops. It's got some job description activities as well. So there's 2 really great books from this series of Road to Work that I have gone through extensively as I prepared for today. Now, you don't have to use a book. I didn't know about these resources the last time I was teaching this class. And so what I ended up doing was using monster.com or indeed.com, finding a job description that had abbreviations, that had, all these different things in there. And even one where you had to kind of think through, where do you actually apply? Is it on this website or an external website, or somewhere else where I have to email somebody? And then I created my own worksheet to have the students practice decoding it. All right, so we have mentioned many digital skills as I've been talking, and you guys also mentioned digital skills in the chat box. So one of the things helping students land a job in 2024 is teaching them the digital skills that are necessary in the application and interview process. So, for example, they can't find online job postings if they don't know how to perform an online search. That's one of the skills that we need to teach them. They also need to know how to create accounts. Some of these online job posting websites, you have to actually create an account to be able to apply through them. So, username, a good password, how to remember your password, that sort of information, we might need to teach our students how to do that. We also need to teach them to upload or attach documents because somewhere in the process, they may be asked to attach their resume. And that is a digital skill that not everyone knows how to do. So that's something we'll need to teach them. And resumes have come up a lot in the in the chat box, early part of this webinar today. I'm not talking today about how to even teach students to create a resume because I did a webinar on that last year in the Teacher Training Plus series. So Danielle will put the link to that in the chat box. If you missed that, you could go back and watch the resume webinar. How to fill in online forms. Little things like the fact that a red asterisk means that this is a required field in the form and you must fill it in. Not all of our students know that. How to do copy and paste. We were having trouble with the copy and paste in the chat box, but many of our students don't know how to do copy and paste. And so if we help them create that personal fact sheet, like I talked about earlier, it's not going to do them as much good if they can't copy and paste the information from it into the online forms. This isn't exactly a digital skill, but I had to sneak it in there. Teaching your students to proofread is so important, so don't neglect or overlook that step. Clicking on the submit button. So that Google form that I showed you, I had to teach my students so many times not to overlook the submit button. And they would tell me, I finished the form, I finished the form. And I was like, I'm not seeing your finished form. And then I started realizing some of the students need to be taught explicitly the digital skill of looking for the submit button. And then Zoom skills for virtual interviews. These days, sometimes, a lot of times, interviews happen online. And I know like these days, a lot of our learners have gotten used to Zoom, but don't make an assumption that all your students know how to use Zoom or that they know they should keep their camera on, for example, during a virtual interview, or how to look at the camera to make some good eye contact. And then finally, email skills for communication. You want to teach them good email skills, and this gets into writing for the workplace and the differences between formal and informal communication. And my next webinar for Teacher Training Plus, which will be in February, is all about writing for the workplace. So if you want to look more at how you can teach some good email skills for your students, please come to that webinar. All right, this is our resources highlight time. And for this one, I've taken some screenshots. I don't know if you know, but there is a really great workplace series in the Education Network online through Pro Literacy called the Pitney Bowes series. And I think it is fantastic. And honestly, I put it here because it's got some great resources for you to teach your learners digital skills, but also your learners can go through these courses. And it's like online courses that your students can go through themselves, and it helps with their digital skills. But it also teaches a lot of the other skills we're talking about today. So you could use it for everything if you wanted. So this is one of the screenshots. And it shows you at the top, you can see it's applying for a job online. And that is one of the many courses in the series. There's also finding a job online, interviewing for a job online, and several digital workplace tools, courses for spreadsheet basics, word processor, email, calendar, communication. Isn't that exciting? It's so exciting that all of this is available for your learners to go through, or you can go through the teacher's part of it to get ideas for teaching your students. And Danielle has put some instructions about this into the chat box, but this is one of the ones that I'm hoping you will all want to take a deep dive into next week on Monday when we do a deeper dive into the resources. Now, if you click on the green file folder or file folders down at the bottom, this is resources that are available for your learners within these this series. And so this is what would happen if you clicked on that. You've got some really great extra resources that can be printed if you want. So you can download them, you can print them. So this is where you can see additional things related to digital skills, like setting up a Gmail account, saving a file to Google Drive, scanning a document with Google Drive. Did you know that you can have Google Drive on your phone and you can use your phone camera to scan a document directly and it gets saved into your Google Drive? I didn't know that till I actually read this. That was a really exciting find for me. And then looking around a little bit more, you can see like this where it says application information worksheet. This is actually kind of like creating your personal fact sheet. So you could use this as a resource for that as well. All right. We've gone through all the like finding the job online and applying and everything. And hopefully that's going to lead your students to get an interview. And so the final step, or one of the final steps in landing the job, is helping them prepare and have those interview skills that they need. So first of all, you're going to need to introduce your students to standard interview questions. And you can type standard interview questions as a search term into a browser, or like say a Google search, and you'll start coming up with those, and you'll find several, but you'll start to see some themes. You also want to prep your students for the hard questions. Most interviews will have at least one question that is a little bit more difficult, and it might ask you to talk about something that doesn't always show yourself in the best lights, such as what's your greatest weakness, or why should we hire you, or a challenging situation you faced at work. You want to teach your students how to spin that, how to answer that question in a way that's honest, but also shows them in their best light. So if it's a weakness, how do you answer it honestly? How do you choose which weakness to talk about, for one thing? Like if your weakness is punctuality and not being on time, being late a lot, I wouldn't choose that one. But what's a weakness you could choose to talk about that is honest? It is a weakness, but also talk about how you're overcoming it, or how you leverage strengths so that the weakness doesn't become too bad of a problem, but really selling yourself. Also, teaching students to do research on the company and or the role. I have done a lot of interviews over the last year, and so many times the interviewee came in not knowing anything about our office or the role they were applying for, and that was less than impressive. So teach them to do research so that they can talk intelligently about what they're applying for. Then role play, role play, role play. I cannot emphasize this one enough. Your learners, whether English is their first language or English is a second language or an additional language, need lots of practice answering these questions. We don't want them to go in not having practiced, and practice enough so that they feel comfortable and confident. I'm going to add one more thing that's not on here, but from a cultural standpoint, I think also understanding what interviews are like in the cultures that your students come from, whether they grew up in the US or outside of the US, can be really helpful for you to know even more what you need to do with them. I know for my English language learners, many of them came from countries or cultures where you do not sell yourself, and you don't talk about yourself a lot, or it can look too much like bragging. And so helping your students realize they really do have to do a little bit more extroverted selling themselves in the US than they might have done in their home cultures is really important. So some activity ideas that I have done with my students. I'll look up sample interviews. I'll type in maybe funny interviews in YouTube, or bad interviews in YouTube, or good interviews in YouTube. And then we'll watch them as a class and interview what the interviewee did well and what they did poorly. We'll also analyze their clothing choices and whether it was appropriate for the company and role that they were applying for. I think I put on the follow-up resource page that you'll get after the webinar a couple of links, at least one link, maybe two, to some videos I've used in the past. Have them create posters with interview tips after you've done a lot of work on how to do a good interview. I like to have students in small groups or pairs create a poster with tips about how to do a good interview, and then they demonstrate or they display those posters and talk about them in a short presentation to the class. It's building those presentation skills and oral communication skills, which are also important for the workforce. And then role plays. Again, I'm going to say it again. Please do role plays with your students. They definitely need as much practice as you can allot time for. All right, so we're going to go on to our final couple of slides, and then I'll take time for questions. Do's and don'ts of the job hunt. Some of these we've already talked about, but there were like a few that didn't fit exactly on any section of my webinar that I wanted to be sure to mention today. First of all, be on the lookout for internal positions. Make sure your students know that they should look for opportunities to move up, especially if they like the workplace where they are, but maybe they just feel like I'm stuck in a low wage position or a low skill position. Read the entire application first before starting. You want them to look through the whole application, kind of know what's going to be expected of them so that they feel ready to start and they know that they have all the information at hand that they're going to need to complete it right then and there. Don't leave sections blank. Teach your students NA that it means not applicable, and that they, instead of just skipping sections, if the section doesn't apply to them, they should write NA. Because if an employer sees a blank section, they don't know why the student left or the applicant left it blank, and they could make some negative assumptions. Be honest. Teach them to be honest on their applications and in their interviews, but also, as I mentioned earlier, teach them to sell themselves as well. Make a good first impression. Importance of proofreading. Those applications should be as error-free as possible. Teach them about dressing neatly and appropriately for the company and the type of job it's going to be. Make sure you teach them to do their homework about the company. I talked about that one. This is a big one, asking potential references for permission before you submit them as a reference. I've had people ask me if they could give my name as a reference, and a few times it's been someone who I know that I'm probably not going to give them a reference. And so I was really thankful that they came and asked me for permission, because I wouldn't want to give them a bad reference. And so what I did instead was I just said, I'm not sure I'm going to have time in the next few weeks to take a phone call or write anything for you. It might be best if you find someone else. It was a little white lie, but it gave them a chance to find someone else who might give them a better reference. So I think it's a good idea to teach your students how to choose references and how to check with them ahead of time to make sure that it is okay to use them. And then send a thank you note. So someone put that in the chat box early on steps. So after the interview, you want to teach your students that they should send a brief thank you note, these days by email. And again, when we do our written communication in the workplace webinar in February, we can talk a little bit about what that could look like and some activities just to teach those writing skills to our students. All right, so we've talked about a lot of activities, and I find that the best way that I learn and professionally develop is if I go to a webinar like you've attended with me today, I use something that I learned in the webinar within the next 2 to 3 weeks. And if I don't, then I tend to forget it and it never becomes a part of my professional practice. So I'm challenging you. Which activity do you think you could add into your own teaching and lessons and classes within the next few weeks. We can go as far out as a month. If you go much farther than that, you're probably going to forget it. So write it in the chat box. I want to know, which one do you want to try with your learners? Thank you, Vince, for being the first to answer. Personal fact sheet. Decoding the job description. That's good. That's a good one to do. And I'm going to give credit to Danielle as we were brainstorming ideas for this series or this round of Teacher Training Plus. That was her idea and I grabbed it. Great. So a lot of personal fact sheet and decoding. Very good. Interview practice, digital skills. Great. I'm going to let you guys keep putting in the chat box, but I'm going to go ahead and go through a few last slides. Um, your opinion really does matter to me. I read every single survey. I take the good and the bad and think about how can we make this better so that you all get the training that you're looking for that's useful for you and that we can create the best webinars possible. So Danielle has put the link to the survey in the chat box, and I'm asking that you would fill that out. You can open the link right now and have it as one of those 50 tabs you've got open right now on your computer. I'm going to turn my my video on so that you can see me as I say that. So I know you probably have about 50 tabs open. Let this be one of them and let it stay open. And then in the next 2 days, would you complete the survey? I'd really like that. And I will also send you reminders. So thank you for that. And at this point, I can answer some questions. And there's been so many things coming through the chat box. I haven't been able to fully keep up with questions.
All right, so let's take a look at some of the questions. One participant asked about the Google Sheet and will I get the submission or do I have to adjust it so that my students' responses don't go to Michele?
Thank you for that. Yeah. So that Google form, you would have to create your own Google form, or I'm going to get your students' responses. I just wanted you to have the link so that you could be viewing those questions and the answers as you create your own Google form. But definitely, if you send that exact link, then I'll get your students' responses and you'll never see them.
Another participant asked, do you have the resources to help applicants with online assessment that are part of job applications?
Yeah, so Rika, I would love to know more about that. Could you in the chat box maybe write what kinds of assessments you're talking about that come with online job applications?
Another person asked about the workforce resources from Pitney Bowes. That is on Education Network. And to log on to Education Network, you can go to our main website. Danielle also put the link in the chat box. And
Great.
then, yeah.
I see Rika's follow-up. So this is great. You know what, Rika, I'm going to need to do a little exploration over the weekend into that. I think if I can probably find more information and be able to answer that a little bit better. And so please come to one of the workshops next week and we'll talk a little bit about that. Because I think that's a good question and I'd love to be able to learn more about it and give you some ideas. And I did not mention the third workshop as much, but on Wednesday, we're going to create a little lesson plan for doing one of these activities with our learners. So like a lot of you put decoding as something you would like to try. So if you come Wednesday, we're going to create a little decoding mini lesson plan, a segment that you could do within one of your lessons. And then if there's time and if you want to, you could even practice with each of you get a turn being the teacher and we're your students and leading us through an activity. So I hope you'll come on Wednesday as well.
That's all I have in the Q&A.
Well, thank you, Maribel and Danielle, and I'll stay around for another minute or two. Um,
Oh, I'm sorry, we did get a couple of last minute ones. Can you post a link for the upcoming webinars? Thank you. And then when looking at job skills, do you have students add all skills listed on, say, LinkedIn in their resume?
um, okay, so I would select certain skills that they would list on their resume, like the skills that employers are often looking for, such as anything that they know about using Microsoft Word or Documents. I would also have them list like that they're proficient with online meeting or conferencing software such as Zoom, those kinds of things. I wouldn't necessarily have them list everything. And one of the things in my resume webinar that I discussed was how you want to tailor your resume to the job you're applying for. So I don't reuse the exact same resume every time I apply for a job. I use the basic same, but then I customize it a little bit to make it fit the job I'm applying for. So if there's a skill that seems like the employer's looking for in that job, then I want to make sure that's what's listed on my resume. And then LinkedIn too. Yeah, I do a workshop with learners or a class on LinkedIn and building your LinkedIn profile, and that's a homework assignment that they have to do, and then they have to connect with me on LinkedIn. And so I teach them how to add some, a basic bio and some of their skills on LinkedIn as well. And I would say I would teach them for LinkedIn to list the skills that you want to be known for. So if you want to be in jobs or employers who are looking for certain skills to find you because you've got those skills, those are the ones you would want to link. But sometimes you have some skills and you're like, I don't really want jobs that use those skills. I wouldn't bother listing those then.
Okay.
Well, thank you, everyone. It's been great being with you today, and I hope to see you next Monday or Tuesday or Wednesday or all of them. And have a great weekend.